the medium multi-role combat aircraft deal. It was supposed to be for 126 aircraft, of which some would be in flyaway condition, the rest would be manufactured in India.
This requirement for the MMRCA was always seen as a one-off purchase, off-the-shelf purchase of fighter jets. It was actually just Mirages. It began with a requirement for 126 Mirages. The NDA won. They said, look, let's not take 126 aircraft, because if we do that, that'll mean we take everything from one country. It'll be unfair to indigenous defense industry. Let's give our HAL, our LCA Tejas a chance. Let's buy a small quantity of these imported aircraft and build the rest in India.
What is the Rafale fighter jet? Because, I think for our listeners and viewers, many of them, when you think fighter jets, they would all just imagine one piece of technology that does it, from shooting missiles to carrying, etc. But let's talk about how the Rafale would be placed in the IAF's ecosystem once you have the 150, which includes the 114 that you are about to sign a deal for. Welcome to Inner Defense. In the late 2000s, just as I was finishing junior college, nursing some ambitions of joining the National Defense Academy, I heard about the Indian Air Force looking for a new fighter jet. I read reports that the Air Force was going to be organizing a competition. I remember imagining all these fancy fighter jets from America, from Europe, from Russia, taking part in some, one-on-one dogfights in the air above India, and the Air Force sort of, figuring out and finalizing that one fighter jet it likes the best. All that did happen, by the way. But today, nearly 2 decades later, as I record this episode in the 3rd season of Inner Defense, I realized that I am still yet to see the conclusion of that competition. Today, I'm going to be talking about, with my guest Sandeep Unnithan, about the conclusion that may finally happen now, actually, just under a different name, or I should say, different acronym. Hey, Sandeep, how are you?
Good, Dave. Good to be back.
What did you think of my throwback to my childhood?
All right. Yeah, that's like a lot of defense deals. I can, your childhood, and it was my early days in Delhi, 20 years back. We were told there were these 2 big deals that would happen just around the corner. The first one was the MMRCA deal, and the other was the submarine deal, Project 75, India. So both deals have been in the pipeline for 20 years. But what is 20 years in a 5,000-year civilization?
Yeah, exactly. What is 20 years? So for some context, what I was referring to in my opener is the MMRCA deal that was taking shape in the early 2000s. 2007, 2008 was the time the tender was floated.
Officially.
Officially.
But the process began somewhere in 99.
So I'm gonna come to that for that piece of history. But to set that context for our listeners and viewers, so 2008 is when that tender that I read about when I was just in my junior college, that sort of was floated, and the competition was held between these 6 fighter jets from different countries. That was the MMRCA deal, the medium multi-role combat aircraft deal. It was supposed to be for 126 aircraft, of which some would be in flyaway condition, the rest would be manufactured in India. The change of name that I'm referring to is the one that we'll discuss today at length, the MRFA deal, the multi-role fighter aircraft, to buy around 114 fighter jets. That is almost in the last stage of government clearance. So we'll talk about these 2 deals on this episode. But first, Sandeep, I was a bit surprised that we haven't seen any reporting coming out of Reuters that India is also among the countries in talks with Pakistan to purchase a GF-17. Might as well do that,
Why let go of this great opportunity to get the GF-17? Considering they've sold it to everyone except India, why single out India for this?
So much talk about this on social media. So much chatter. They're in talks with Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Bangladesh.
Libya, don't forget
Libya. Amazing. I mean, for those who didn't get that, by the way, just look up these keywords on Google. It's a long story, so I don't want to get into that and sort of go on a different tangent altogether. But there's just some talk amongst defense experts about some very suspicious reporting that's been happening for the last couple of weeks regarding so-called talks that Pakistan is involved in to sell GF-17 aircraft, which is actually Chinese tech manufactured by Pakistan.
Assembled in Pakistan with a Russian engine.
Assembly lines are something we quite A lot of. So Sandeep, before we talk about the deal at hand, the MRFA, which has cleared, I think the third last clearance stage in the government. There's two more left. The final being the Cabinet Committee on Security, post which the expectation is that when French President Macron visits India, maybe next month or the month after, the deal would be signed to buy 114 Rafale fighter jets. We already have 36 of them, which we bought after the MMRCA competition, and that was an emergency purchase. So, Sandeep, I want to get to that history first, because it's been a while. Like you said, it's been 20 years. We only have vague memories of it. I have vague memories of it. To better understand where we are at with the MRFA, I want to talk about the history of the MMRCA deal. What was the situation back then that the Air Force had felt this need to sort of, look for a fighter jet? How was this competition actually held? In my mind, I've always thought of kara kaise hoga? Were they fighting against each other? Were they placed in a hangar and measurements were taken ki kaun sa lamba hai, kaun sa chota hai, kiska missile bada hai? Just kidding. But really, so this how that competition was held and how the French Rafale turned out to be the winner.
Great story there, Dave. And I think there's a book in the Indian multi-role fighter aircraft program acquisition when it actually gets done. By the way, I have a feeling that it's going to get done this time, right? There are no more delays. It is now or never. If it doesn't happen in the next couple of months, it probably will never happen because the pressures now have gone beyond break point, and as you know, the geopolitical scenario now with the way it's been, it is. And again, 21 days into the new year, and we feel like it's already been midpoint to the year, but this requirement for the MMRCA was always seen as a one-off purchase, off-the-shelf purchase of fighter jets. It was actually just Mirages. It began with a requirement for 126 Mirages.
Also French.
All French. And it's in the Kargil war when the IAF was super impressed with the Mirage 2000's performance, bombing Tiger Hill and all of those places. And they said, we need more Mirages because we're losing MiG-21s. The LCA hadn't flown then, right? So it was a few years before. It was 2 years before the LCA's maiden flight. They said, we need a stopgap foreign acquisition. American fighters were not open to us in those days, right? This was just early days, just after the end of the Cold War. So the Air Force projected a requirement for 126 Mirage 2000-5s, the modern, the newest variant at that time. And they were so careful about it, where one of the air chiefs who was pushing the procurement said that, we were so careful, we wanted this deal to go through. We said, don't even make it the -5 because the MOD is going to say, oh, that's a new aircraft. You'll have to go through a whole new procurement process. So they said additional Mirages. So they pushed it as a requirement for additional Mirages, which was a couple of $1 billion then, a lot of money even back in the day. And then, lo and behold, the government changed in 2004. You had the UPA that came in and said, you can't buy such a large quantity of aircraft, 126 aircraft from one company, no competition, nothing. So they rebooted the whole thing and they said, open it out to other global manufacturers. And by then, the Americans were coming in very big and strong. So they said, we want our aircraft to be part of this contest as well. So they pushed for the F-16 and the F-18. The Russians were already there with the MiG-29, which they pushed a modern version of. Upgraded version, the MiG-35. The Gripen also came in, which is the Swedish aircraft. And you had the French with the Mirage. Now, the French said, look, we're shutting down the Mirage 2000 line. You take the production line. They tried one last attempt to kind of sell the aircraft. We said, no, we're going in for the MMRCA.
So they offered, you take it and you build it.
You take it, build it, upgrade it, do what you want. Because we are switching entirely to the Rafale. So when that didn't happen, they pitched the Rafale. They said, we are not selling the Mirage, we will give you the Rafale. That began with the RFI, I think in 2007 was when it began. The contest, everything took about 7 years. I mean, it was 7 rigorous years. It was almost exactly the way you mentioned, with the measuring tape going there to every individual aircraft. You had Air Force teams flying to the different countries, evaluating these aircraft in the field, looking at their performance, their characteristics. And at that time also, it was a very, very big deal. I remember the the figures were staggering. $10 billion, right? Almost 20 years back. $10 billion was at a time when I think the defense budget, India's defense budget was about $20 billion, 20 or 30 billion. At that time also it was seen as a very big deal, right? Now, when the Air Force selected the Rafale among all the aircraft, they evaluated the F-16. They said, there's no chance we're going to take the F-16. The same aircraft is across the border.
Right.
The F-18 wasn't fit for purpose. The Gripen was a American engine. So they said, look, the Rafale is the best thing. Politically, it aligns with us. And this is anyway the aircraft that we started out to buy. But then the MOD, the Defense Ministry, the Defense Minister, they got sticker shock. When they looked at the price, it was like, 2 lakh crore. And I mean, I spoke to the Defense Minister then, and he said, look, they've gone in and they've bought such an expensive aircraft. How do we, push a deal through like this? It's such a lot of money. So they put it on the back burner. By the way, it was more than $10 billion, because from a Mirage 2000, it became something. You started out to buy a Swift Desire and you ended up with a SUV. It became that kind of an analogy. So
budget nahi tha.
Budget nahi tha. Exactly. So the thing is that you put such a big deal in front of the MOD, they're going to get intimidated. No one wants to take a decision. So it was put on the back burner. Now that continued. So the governments changed. In 14, you had the NDA 1. And that deal again started doing the rounds. Look, the Air Force said, look, there is this thing, 126 aircraft. We need this. By then, the LCA was already getting somewhere, right? Yeah. You had the Mark 1 that was almost inducted. The Mark 1A was being pushed by Parikar. And then they came up with the government of the day, the UPA, the NDA 1. They said, look, let's not take 126 aircraft. Because if we do that, that'll mean we take everything from one country. It'll be unfair to indigenous defense industry. Yeah. Let's give our HAL, our LCA Tejas a chance. Let's buy a small quantity of these imported aircraft and build the rest in India. Let's, go for the LCA Tejas, which was a good decision at that time, right? It was sound that you don't buy the entire spear from a foreign country. You import the tip of the spear, whichever the lethal part can be those two, that fighter. And I spoke with one of the key decision makers at that time, and my question was that, why 36? So he said, well, the idea was that we asked the Air Force, what's the minimum requirement that you need? We can't go for 126. It's a lot of money. So the Air Force said, well, 72. So we said, look, even 72 is 4 squadrons. Thoda aur kam karo. So
bargaining chal
raha. Almost like that. Yeah, it's a lot of money. So the government wanted to save money and plow in that the remaining thing into the indigenous program. It is a well thought out decision. But there are issues with that. I'll come to that in a bit. So they said, what is the minimum quantity that you can accept? They said, look, 2 squadrons. So the deal was, you take 36 aircraft, 2 squadrons, one in the east and one in the west, right? One for Pakistan and one for China. And the idea is that you create facilities in both air bases, in the west and in the east, which can support more aircraft when they come, right? So idea was that it would eventually go up. It says, don't take all 72 in one go. Abhi le lo, baad mein le lenge. So, I mean, you can, question that decision now with the wisdom of hindsight. Maybe we should have taken 72. It wouldn't have worked out to be this much. Yeah. So they took the 36 flyaway condition off the shelf. No TOT, no license production, no nothing. And then the controversy hit. The entire campaign for the 2019 elections with the UPA versus the NDA was on the Rafale controversy. Yeah. And the 36 more aircraft that took a backseat. And this, I spoke to one of the air chiefs there again. I said, look, what exactly happened? He says, look, we were actually right there. We were planning to go for 36 more, right? But because of this political controversy, the government kind of said, look, it's better we don't touch it right now. It's too sensitive. 36 were delivered. I think both squadrons came in by 2020, if I remember correctly, 19 or 20. All were delivered. And the thing for 2 more squadrons was put on the back burner. But then what happened is that this requirement of the Air Force it remained this,
Yeah.
this one-time buy that they pushed for back in the 90s. That requirement always, because that their squadron numbers started going down very rapidly as the MiG-23s went out
Which they
first.
knew back then that this will happen. So that was happening.
But you were banking on the indigenous fighter to come in numbers, that you would replace every retiring MiG-21 or MiG-23 with an LCA Tejas
At that very same time.
at simultaneous this thing.
Yeah.
It didn't happen. So the LCA Tejas program went through a number of delays, and those delays are very well known. It was possibly slow production. The engine was an issue. The engine is still an issue, right? It's possibly one of the biggest conundrums. Whether, in hindsight, again, should we have gone in for an American engine? Should we not have pumped more money into the Kaveri? More oversight, a better, project management team to get that going, right? There is no substitute for your own jet engine. A lot of the problems that we are facing with the fighter aircraft program, I would argue, are because we don't have our own engine. Look at the way the Americans are squeezing us with the GE engines, right? We're not even getting those engines on time. And every engine that's delivered to India, every GE 404 engine is delivered with a lot of fanfare. Like it's being given to us for free. Every time a GE engine lands in India, I think of PL 480. The one that started off the Green Revolution. With Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi said, I hope I don't have to, beg someone for food.
Yeah.
It's the same way. It's like we're paid for this, right? This is part of a contracted deal, and it's being given to us like it's a big favor is being done to India, right? That itself should have triggered off a warning, and we should have gone in hell for leather for a fully funded government program, like, as we've discussed in the past, Dave, like the nuclear submarine program.
Yes.
This is a vital, critical program. Without your own fighter jet engine, so many indigenous programs are suffering, right? Not just your MMRCA, not just your LCA Mark 1, Mark 2, your naval fighter, TED-BF, your fifth generation fighter. All of these hinge around getting your own engine. But to cut a long story short, it now comes down to the fact that the Air Force realizes we don't have MiG-21s. We are going to have to start retiring our Jaguars and Mirages, which are bulk of our fleet. And we are down to the smallest Indian Air Force since 1962.
Wow.
More than 60 years, right? Now, I totally get it that one Sukhoi 30 is not equal to one MiG-21, right? And today the Sukhoi 30 is the bulk of your Air Force. More than 270 aircraft are there. And, one squadron of Sukhoi 30 is possibly equal to 4 squadrons of MiG-21s.
Right.
The quantity versus quality thing. But there is a lot of people who are saying that, look, quantity has a quality of its own. And today you're looking at China and Pakistan, who are even more closely aligned than they were in the past. And we saw that during Op Sindoor just a few months ago. And they're adding on fighter jets in numbers. The Pakistan Air Force is about 20 squadrons. They are, thanks to President Trump, they've got an upgrade to all their old F-16s, which means that their F-16s come up to a Block 52 standard for about $700 million. And they're getting fifth generation fighter aircraft possibly from China. And China is churning out fifth generation fighter aircraft like sausages. They will have 1,000 fifth generation fighters by the end of this decade.
Wow.
And I'm not saying all 1,000 are going to be deployed against us, but a substantial number are going to be deployed against us. And that is weighing heavily on the minds of our planners. So this decision to go in for it, and if you see the speed with which, as you mentioned, the speed with which it's, gone through all the hoops, the Defense Ministry, the Air Force, of course, and now it's the political move. And it will possibly be part of this very, very big geopolitical shift, I believe. It's one of the most significant ones in our time, is of India and Europe pivoting towards each other.
Yeah.
And if you heard Mark Carney's speech, he pretty much called it out there. And he said, if you're not on the dining table, then you're on the menu, right? The strong are going to eat up the weak, and it's for all the middle powers to come together to make common cause. And middle powers would be countries like France, countries like India, which we will have to come together, and a fighter jet program, a fighter engine program, and a fifth generation fighter engine program. All of these are interwoven. So it's not just the MRFA, it's also the engine for the fifth generation fighter aircraft program that we are going to develop with the French, and with Safran. This is the 120, 140 kilonewton engine, high thrust engine for the fifth generation fighter, and many other things that will come in with this deal. So it's going to be a package. It won't be just a one-off deal. And France, I have my issues with the French, right? They never share technology. They're the most miserly country, and I have it on record from friends who worked with them on multiple programs. They never share technology. But you have to give it to them that they are one country that do not attach diplomatic strings to anything that they sell to us. They may be pricey. I mean, the prices, they're like gold-plated prices, right? Whether it's their submarines or their fighter jets or whatever you buy from them. But when it comes to technology, when it comes to the hardware itself, no strings attached. The Americans, as we've clearly seen, there's strings attached to everything, right? And that's the reason why I have a feeling that India is going to start moving away from American equipment. And it was a big wake-up call for us. So we went into the American embrace a few decades ago, almost 2 decades ago, because of the nuclear deal. That's a very big thing. You have to give it to the Americans. But that was the price that they were willing to pay to get India into the American camp. But now with Trump and in the last couple of years, we've seen that America does not necessarily have your best interests at heart. It's looking at what is the big picture there. And the big picture that's emerging from this G2 formation is pretty frightening, where the world is going to be divided into two spheres of influence, where Trump is going to have the entire North and South America. He's going to do what he wants, and that includes Greenland. And China is going to be left to do what it wants in its sphere of influence, and of course the Russian Federation. So it's only countries that have more or less mastered technology, that are pretty much self-sufficient in a lot of areas, are going to be left alone. Everyone else has to fend for themselves. So the MRFA therefore comes in this geopolitical backdrop.
Yeah, right. Before we talk about the broad contours of the deal and what we can expect, obviously we'll know exactly what this deal will outline only when it's signed, because it's still at the approval stage. I'm not sure if the negotiations are also simultaneously still ongoing or if they are done. I'm not sure about that. But before we come to that, and especially I want to talk about this buzzword called transfer of technology, as well, that's one cure for everything. I want to talk about the aircraft itself. What is the Rafale fighter jet? Because, I think for our listeners and viewers, many of them, when you think fighter jets, they would all just imagine one piece of technology that does it, from shooting missiles to carrying, etc. But let's talk about how the Rafale would be placed in the IAF's ecosystem once you have the 150, which includes the 114 that you are about to sign a deal for. Right now, like you said, you have around 260, 270 odd Sukhois. You have 5 to 6 squadrons of Jaguars, which you said are going to be retiring very soon. You have, I think, a few squadrons of the Mirage 2000s. You have 2 squadrons of the Rafales. You have 2 squadrons of the Tejas Mark 1, just Mark 1. And your MiG-21s have retired, and you have, I think, a few squadrons of the MiG-29, also soon to be retired, if I'm not wrong. You have around 180 Tejas Mark 1A on order. Right now, we don't know when they'll come, because even the first one has not still come. Even we've talked about this, I think, over this entire season now. It was supposed to come many months ago. It still hasn't come.
It will.
It will eventually, but that's a different story. So my question to you, Sandeep, is when I look at air war fighting, I imagine some scenarios, right? I imagine an enemy aircraft entering your airspace. So you need this fast jet that can quickly go into the air. That also includes quick turnaround time on the ground. Like the equipments are ready, the pilot's ready, they can quickly dash to the plane, take off, intercept the enemy aircraft, make it back away. In a situation where you want to be on the offensive, you will want to bomb a place. So you want an aircraft that can bomb location. For that aircraft, you'd also want some protecting aircraft that will ensure there's some electronic jamming happening, so that aircraft is not spotted. You'd also want aircraft jets that can take out enemy surveillance, that includes radars and stuff like that. So in all these capabilities, where exactly does the Rafale lie?
Well, the Rafale, what you just outlined, it's a very broad expanse of capabilities. The Rafale can do pretty much all of them, right? And that's why the manufacturers, they call it omni-role. It's an omni-role aircraft. And it can, at the flick of a button, switch between all of these roles.
Right.
And it's a very versatile aircraft. It costs a lot of money, right? It's north of 100 million.
No wonder.
Yeah, it is very expensive, but those capabilities come, they come at a price, very formidable capabilities. It is an air-to-air interceptor. When it carries the Meteor, it can intercept targets beyond 100 kilometers, beyond visual range. When it's carrying the Scalp and it's carrying other air-to-ground munitions like the Hammer, then it becomes a strike aircraft, air-to-grounds. When it's carrying the jammer pods and all that, it becomes an EW aircraft. And it's a naval platform as well. Let's not forget the Navy is getting 28 of them, right?
Yes.
So if you look at it, many years back, someone told me that one of the air chiefs, I forget who, he said, in our mind, this was somewhere in about 15 years back, he said, in our mind, we see 3 aircraft. The IAF of the future should have just 3 aircraft. The light combat aircraft will make up the numbers, right? Hundreds of them, more than like 400 LCAs. They will build, be the bulk in terms of numbers. You will have the quality thing in the center, which is your Rafale.
Okay.
And they would come in they were looking at 120 then. And then above that, you would have your Sukhoi 30, the heavy fighter, which can, carry a heavy bomb load, which can do a lot of other things. There's a lot of commonality in the Su-30 and the Rafale, but the Sukhoi is a decision that we took more than a quarter century ago, in 2000 to be precise, when we went in for that massive deal again. Because there was no other option before us then. It was the Russian aircraft that we had. There was no American aircraft on the horizon. Thank God for that. So it was the Russian aircraft and it was the French aircraft. So these were the 2 horses that we were planning to ride at that time. And now, willy-nilly, this is where we are headed. If you look at the Indian Air Force, if this deal comes through, the 114 Rafale deal, which I believe it will in a matter of months, the Indian Air Force will be looking at just standardizing on 3 fighter types.
Right.
It will be the Su-30, which will continue in numbers for the next 2 decades. Plus, you will have the Rafale, which will be the medium multi-role combat aircraft, which will bring in the cutting edge, the generation 4.5 aircraft. And then you will have the LCA Tejas in numbers, which will be like your quick, doing your heavy duty, running around and, all of that, constrained primarily by the range. But otherwise, they have all the capabilities of a Gen 4.5 aircraft. So these are going to be the 3 major aircraft platforms into the next 10, 15 years before your 5th generation fighters start kicking in. And those will come in small numbers. That requirement for about 3 squadrons of 5th generation fighters, that's still there. So you will probably see the Sukhoi coming in, the Su-57, the Filon. That will probably come in small numbers, 2 or 3 squadrons. And the idea is then the AMCA will take over. So in the MMRCA and the MRFA, I'm mixing my M's. In the MRFA, you will sow the seeds, you will lay the foundation for the engine development for the AMCA.
Very important.
Which is when your high thrust bypass engine, the 140 kilonewton engine comes in, which is a joint development project between us and the French. And that is something that we are going to have the IP for, as is being promised. And that's another big deal. That's also about, $6 or $7 billion that could be in the works very soon. But these 2 deals are linked.
And are linked, yes.
That's very interesting. So this is the carrot to get the French to share more tech and maybe source codes, who knows. But one thing is clear, they're not sharing any source codes.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, again, we'll come to that thing in a bit. But I read some reporting that one of the reasons the MMRCA deal also fell through over India's demands to get some technology transferred here.
Yeah.
Something I'm not getting what reporting I read exactly, but something on the lines of because we were not making a big enough purchase, the French were not really ready to go for that engine deal back then. Is that something that you also heard of?
Well, why the MMRCA deal fell through, one of the deal breakers for the French was that they wanted, the Indian government wanted Rafale, the Dassault, the company that manufactures the Rafale, to certify HAL produced aircraft.
Yes, something. Yes.
So the idea was that you would get 18 aircraft, 18 or I think 18 was a flyaway number, one squadron, and the rest would be built in India, assembled locally through transfer of technology. Now, Dassault said, look, we can't guarantee aircraft that are built by HAL. If you're not building it, we're not going to guarantee it. So now what's happening is, and this is very interesting, this is a massive shift in India's fighter jet ecosystem where you will have for the first time a private sector company coming in. That's the Tata's Advanced Systems Limited, TASL. They will make the LCA, the Rafale, in collaboration with Dassault.
Yeah.
So that is going to be a second fighter jet ecosystem in India. It'll probably be around Nagpur somewhere, Nagpur and UP. Interestingly, not in Bengaluru. So Bengaluru and south of India is going to be the LCA ecosystem, and Nagpur and north of it is going to be the Rafale ecosystem.
Right.
And these will continue. They will run parallel to each other. So HAL will focus on two major programs. One is, of course, the LCA, segueing into the Mark II and then the AMCA. And you will have the, by the way, the AMCA is also not clear who it will go to.
Yes.
So that production thing is also a big question mark. But that's for another episode, I guess. But the other thing that LCA, HAL is going to have to focus on is the Super Sukhoi, the so-called upgrade of the Sukhoi, getting into near 4.5 generation capability.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a travesty, Dev. You've had this aircraft for a quarter century. You've not upgraded it. It's a fantastic aircraft if you look at it. Apart from the RCS, you can't do anything about the RC. It's a big aircraft. You could have used it the way the Americans did. It's a massive aircraft. Yeah, it's like the F-15. If you look at the way the Americans have upgraded the F-15 into a Strike Eagle, it's a bomber. We should have done the same with Sukhoi. And I think in Operation Sindoor, you saw that when in the last day of the thing, it was the Sukhois that were being used as bombers, and they were dropping BrahMos, missiles, air-to-ground missiles. So this is something that we should have worked on way back then. And for strange reasons, there's we've prioritized Mirage upgrades. Not that it's a bad aircraft, but if you could spend $2.2 billion on 50 Mirage 2000, you surely could have spent an equal amount on the Sukhois, which are literally your backbone today. Yeah. Your Sukhois, Su-30s, have become in 2026 your MiG-21s by default, because you've so many of them. You have 270 of them, right? Literally,
they are your Air Force right now.
That's right. The Sukhoi 30 is the Indian Air Force today. We are talking about the MRFA Rafale, which is the Air Force of 10 years from now.
Yes, true.
We've lost so much time, You were in school when this deal began?
I was in junior college.
In junior college. Oh, man. That's how long it's been. I mean, the time we'll lose on these deals. Decisions, it's like an opportunity cost, and they all come back to bite you. Yeah. If you had taken that decision 10 years back or 20 years back, it wouldn't have, hurt as much as it does today, because I really pity the guys in the defense ministry who are looking at this massive $35 billion, almost half the size of the defense budget. I mean, it's not all going out in one go. Yeah. It's going to be, there is going to be some cash down, and then it's going to be EMIs.
Yes. Right. We'll talk about the magic word, like I said, transfer of technology, but after a quick break.
In 2009, you wrote a piece on Advani ji insisting on being the leader of opposition and taking away from what that there had to be a change in the BJP, and he shouldn't have done that. There was active criticism, which you wrote about very clearly. Can you do that today?
I have done it once in a while.
Have you? When was the last time?
I questioned, some of their visa policies on taking away some poor foreign scholar being turfed out. I've just rewritten a piece which was slightly critical of their Bangladesh policy.
Swapan Das Gupta ji, can you really criticize the party
I'm not
today?
that deeply involved in you see,
Okay.
I haven't criticized it at places, partly because as an active politician, you don't do these things.
I figure. See, that's a really good.
That's what the thing is. Even if you have,
that's a good excuse. It's an excuse I'll buy as a journalist. I'll buy that.
Even if you have certain doubts,
you air them in private.
Yeah, keep it private.
No, fair.
At that
point.
time, but I think that at particular point, you talk about 2009. I felt Advani had let himself down.
Had let himself down. Why do you think he did it?
Whatever the reasons are which he did it, he shouldn't have. He should have at that time gracefully opted out, and which ultimately they had to. Sushma ji became leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, and Arun became in the Rajya Sabha. So it happened.
But it didn't have to go down so acrimoniously.
Yeah.
It could have just been natural and progression.
Welcome back. Sandeep, before the break, we kind of touched upon different aspects of what this deal would look like to buy the 114 Rafale fighter jets from France. What's been reported so far, again, these is all just reporting. There's nothing that's formal yet because everything is dependent on government go-aheads. And
No one's talking.
Yeah, and no one's talking. And final negotiations. So the estimated cost of this deal is around rupees 3.25 lakh crore. This is for 114 jets, of which around 18 odd, that is one squadron, would be in flyaway condition.
Yeah.
Just basically fly them from France. The rest would be built at a line, like you said, in Nagpur. There is talk of there being not exactly transfer of technology in the sense people would understand that term, though I don't know who understands that term. But you would be able to, for example, strap on your own missiles to it. So the BrahMos, for example, which right now currently cannot be strapped onto a Rafale, will be strapped onto a Rafale in the future. The current crop of Rafales that we have would be upgraded to the version that these Rafales would be in. That would be like, I'm guessing, some better capability and stuff like that. That's like my iPhone getting a software update or something like that, if I'm not wrong. And like you said, there's this the other deal linked to it, the engine deal, where India and France co-develop an engine to which India would have the IP rights to. Which would ease a lot of your future fighter jet programs. But I think that's an episode we can do separately altogether. I want to talk about this magic pill of transfer of technology that comes up whenever we talk about deals with foreign companies and foreign game. Didn't we get some transfer of technology from Russia with Sukhois? I don't know if we did or not. And I also I want you to sort of make our listeners and viewers understand this myth of having this magical line where you manufacture this aircraft as though suddenly it makes it your own. Because on a previous season of In Our Defense, one of the guests had said that people don't realize that Russia still makes you pay for the Sukhois that you still manufacture in India by your own company.
Absolutely. Where this whole myth of transfer of technology is some mirage that's being sold to people just to say that, oh, we don't need to invest in sweat and blood and R&D and break our backs over figuring out the technology. We're just going to go and import it, and those guys have promised us transfer of technology. The thing is that you talk to the LCA guys who've developed it, who've sweated over that thing, the mission computer and all of those things, and ask them what is the most important part of the aircraft according to them, and they'll tell you it's the mission computer designing that thing, those lines of code that they have developed, which now gives us the ability to literally plug and play any weapon system, right? It just happened that somebody had the idea that, hey, the Sea Harriers are being retired and they've got some pretty good missiles still. I think it was the Darby and the Python, Israeli missiles. Can we integrate them on the LCA? And lo and behold, they did it. Because we had the full source code, we had everything, right? We had written the source code for it.
You can just go in and change the code.
And just change the code, you integrate the missiles, and lo and behold, the LCA is a Darby and a Python weapon carrier. And Could you do the same with another? Could you do it with the Sukhoi? No. You'll have to run back to the Russians. Could you do it with the Mirage? No. You'll still need the French for that. So that's the whole thing. This whole myth of transfer of technology. Nobody transfers technology. And you have to be crooked like the Chinese to steal technology. That's the only way this game works. There are very few countries. I'm struggling to think of any time when we've actually been given transfer of technology in that sense. It's not happened with the MiG-21. It's certainly not happened with the Sukhoi 30, despite the fact that we've been building those aircraft for, again, a quarter of a century. We need the Russians for every little screw and every little, we have to run back to them for that.
The drawings.
That's the whole game. And that is one of the reasons that if transfer of technology were a reality, you wouldn't have just 6 countries or 7 countries in the world that had fighter jet manufacturing capabilities, right? Everybody in the world would have had a fighter jet program. Oh, I've transferred technology to 5 countries and everyone's now making their own thing. It's not like making Coca-Cola or Pepsi or something like that. That formula has been transferred and immediately a bottling plant starts. So it's a very, very back-breaking kind of thing. And for us, and that is why the LCA is so very important, and we should never give up on that. It is because we have now building our own products. We are figuring out how to write those lines of code, integrate our own weapons, and most importantly, we're figuring out the production processes, the assembly lines, how to do it. We've not done in decades, and that lost art is what we are reimagining now with the LCA and all its Mark 1s and Mark 2s and all of that. That's why it becomes really important. It's a mirage. It's a myth. Transfer of technology. Even our best friends haven't transferred us technology.
Yeah, Russians,
Not the nuclear subs.
Russians. The nuclear sub.
Nuclear
the reactor,
subs,
again.
Well, you can argue that Russian help on the nuclear sub is not as needed now because we figured out a lot by ourselves. But I guess the thrust on that is very different. The oversight is different because these are your ultimate weapons. They're meant to guarantee the protection of the survival of the state. And all. So I guess the pulls and pressures over there are slightly different. I was talking to Air Marshal Chopra, who headed the CAPS, and he's a ace pilot, Mirage pilot, and before that MiG-21s. He was on this MiG-21 upgrade program, which became the Bison in Russia. And he said, the Russians were willing to give us the source code for $100,000 because this was back in the day when they were really broke. And some of those scientists came forward and said, look, we'll give you the source codes for all of this. If you give us $100,000, it can be QED. And they went to the defense minister of that time, the project team, he says. And he says, the defense minister then exploded. He says, how dare you, ask our friends, the Russians, for the, source code or pay money for it and stuff like that. He actually said this. I mean, so he didn't understand how vital this was for us to, master that MiG-21, which is an aircraft we've been flying for 50, 60 years. He says, we still didn't have that right till the very end. We were dependent on the Russians. And that's one reason why the Israeli upgrade of that program fell out, because the Russians said, you go to the Israelis, we're not going to help you with anything. Right? So that's how countries control client states. Yeah. They master the technology, and then they sit on the top of it and they dictate terms. That you can't do anything. You can't move a screwdriver on the aircraft without asking them. And then they have to send in their thing, and it's a lot of money. And so the experts who did the LCA upgrade with the Python and the Darby missile were saying that if he had gone to the French, for instance, it would have taken months, and they would have charged hundreds of millions of dollars to do that upgrade. Not hundreds, but tens definitely.
Yeah. In fact, this is something, I think car owners can probably relate to, especially car owners much older than me who've had the experience of owning simpler cars, analog cars with no fancy computer systems, where any mechanic could more
Any
or less
roadside mechanic
fix it.
could
Yeah,
fix
could
it.
more or less fix it. Today,
I've had one of those cars.
yeah, today, apart from a basic puncture and some minor start issues, battery troubles, you would have to go to a service center for them to plug in their specialized laptop.
That's right.
Go to the machine and figure out what's going on.
Your car is like a smartphone, right?
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you what, I got my car's battery replaced from an outside vendor because service center said कि आप करवा लीजिए, वारंटी में दिक्कत नहीं होगा, हमारा महंगा मिलेगा आपको, वैसे भी हम भी वहीं से लाने वाले हैं. So I got that done, but the blinker, the light that kept saying there's an issue with the car, kept flashing. So I called the service center guy. I was like, boss, तुमने बोला बाहर से करवा बोलते हैं. अरे सर भूल गया था. You'll have to come back to the service center. We'll have to use a computer to change the code so that the blinker goes off.
Oh, wow. So there you go. Yeah, that's a good analogy, by the way. That's exactly how the OEMs function. Yeah. They have everybody, they have everyone by the scruff of their necks when it comes to the so-called thing. And transfer of technology is a myth. Let's face it.
We would not do it with the Tejas, for example. If we were to sell Tejas, would we transfer that source code to somebody else?
Absolutely not. We will never transfer that technology. That's like crown jewels. And that's one of the reasons why, crystal blade technology, single crystal blade technology of the fighter jet engines. Nobody transfers those kind of things. So this is like, again, 3-4 countries in the world. They will never part with that kind of technology, the metallurgy and all that. And these countries are reached where they have by investing in hundreds of billions of dollars over the years, over several programs. And today they sit where they are because of those investments. And they're not going to allow competitors to come up.
Yeah.
And I've heard this in private sector companies where this, I don't know whether I should say it, but L&T was tying up with a foreign OEM for submarines.
Okay.
And they refused to tie up with him. He said, why? No, because you're going to reverse engineer and you're going to become our competitor. So they weren't afraid of tying up with a public sector undertaking, but they were afraid of tying up with a private sector guys because they said these guys are submarine builders and they have fire in their bellies and they will do it.
They have the wherewithal.
So when you have the fire in the belly, like the Chinese do, then you will commit resources, you will set up programs, you will appoint people, and then you will expect results. We didn't do that. We are a cricket playing nation that loves to take its eyes off the ball, every now and then. And these are programs which can't be played like T20 matches. They have to be played with the rigor of the entire career of a test playing player or a T20 player.
Yeah.
These are a series of matches that you have to win. Yeah. And that's something that we haven't done very well. We have done exceptionally well in certain programs. Like, again, my favorite, the nuclear submarine program. But we haven't in very critical areas like aerospace engines, jet engines, or fighter jet programs and stuff like that. But we live in hope.
Right. Sandeep, a couple of last points as we end this episode, and this is to do more with the geopolitics of this all than with the deal itself. Is one for the MRFA, the 114 Rafale fighter jets and the associated terms and conditions in terms of, we'll produce X of them over here, the ability to strap on your own equipment and missiles, the ability for the Rafale to be part of your network, which is very important, and give it that ability to sort of, give that overall picture of the war zone to your to your command center. So is there any, and the cost as well, is there any hold up? Do you think in the upcoming few weeks, couple of months, anything for PM Modi and President Macron to still thrash out when they meet? Or is this more or less going to be a done deal and they're just going to shake hands and sign that document?
I think it's, from all accounts, it appears that it is a done deal. There are those issues that have to be, thrashed out. There are some non-negotiables. For instance, the French are saying they will not share the source code. You will have to work around it. You will have to look at other, maybe via medias, if they can give you like a patch or something like that. Like exactly like how the Israelis got it with the F-35. The Americans didn't give them the source codes, but they did give them a via media whereby they could integrate their own weapons on it. So the non-negotiable for India in this is going to be that you are going to have to adapt Indian weapons onto the Rafale.
Yeah.
That is a non-negotiable. You cannot have a Rafale which is only going to, fire these pricey French weapons. You're going to have a Rafale that will fire the Rudram, that will fire the BrahMos NG when it's developed. It will have to fire the Astra for sure, right? These are 3 or 4 Indian very key, crucial weapon systems, including jamming pods, for instance, indigenously developed capabilities, which will have to be mounted onto the Rafale. You cannot have a standalone French, fighter thing. And I think there are a few areas that they're looking at, how they could work together, integrate Indian weapons and all that. Because, like I said, I mean, you cannot have a standalone, French thing. Oh, this guy is different from all the other aircraft, including the Sukhoi, the Super 30 when it's upgraded, the LCA. They're going to fly Indian weapons, and this aircraft which you've bought for an extraordinary cost is not going to be able to fire these. Yeah. So I think those are the minor issues there that they will have to work out. But my sense is that it's going to happen now, because there is a pressure on both sides, both on India, given the way the geopolitics of the region is shaping up, the Western adversary, the Northern adversary, their collusivity. France needs India, India needs France, India needs the EU. And I think 2026 is that big year of that geopolitical realignment where India makes common cause, not with the United States, but with Europe. Yeah. And you're going to see that in a few days from now, when you will have Ursula von der Leyen of the EU delegation coming here, Republic Day, and subsequently followed up by President Macron. Though I don't know if he's going to come wearing those blue glasses, aviators of his, but this 2026 is going to be that big year of realignment. Merz was here, Chancellor Merz was here. And so you're going to see possibly the submarine program, the P-75I going to Germany, the Rafale going to France, and the joint engine development with Safran, again with France. So very key areas where the United States, at least in 2 of them, for the fighter jets and for the engines, the US would have been a partner, not any longer, thanks to Trump.
Very ironically, and in fact, I think what may also sort of, persuade France to sort of, soften its hard stance on some of the non-negotiables. Obviously, source code will never be shared, but, be more open to some of India's other demands actually could be Trump, by the way, because of what Trump is doing. They are like, okay, we're going to need one of the other big middle powers, as Carney likes to call them. So India is definitely among those. So maybe that's going to be a factor. And speaking of this factor, Mr. Trump, I'm wondering, Sandeep, based on what I've seen in the last 21 days, because I never thought that what I'm about to ask you can ever be a practical reality. But now I'm actually wondering, because with this person, you never know. Your entire Tejas Mark 1A program right now is dependent on American engines, right? Which are already delayed for various factors, but no one has said outright that it's because of tensions between India and the US. Is there a possibility for Trump sort of, really sort of threatening your Tejas Mark 1A program by holding or withholding those engines?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's scary then, right? Is India worried about this?
I'm sure they are. And I was speaking to some, senior people in the system, and they said, well, maybe, we should have had a backup plan for this. Now, who in their minds back then would have, thought of a situation where the US would go rogue like this?
True.
And, you're talking of invasions being threatened and countries being annexed and, all that kind of thing. Like, as the Canadian Prime Minister put it, it's not a gradual process. It's a rupture. It's a very serious rupture from the past. It's sudden, and it was coming. But off late, it seems to have accelerated. And I think it has to do with the kind of great power competition that we are seeing in this post-Cold War world. And countries that have made their investments well are reaping the benefits of that, and countries that haven't or took the wrong decisions at certain points in their development cycles are now regretting that fact. And so, what you said is entirely within the realm of the possible, where you're looking at a program that is to deliver the LCA Mark 1 Alpha and 2 are to deliver something like 250 odd aircraft, 234 for the 1 and the 1 Alpha, and then subsequent maybe another 100. So that's more than 300 aircraft based on an American engine. And that was how critical your own engine was. If you had your own engine, you wouldn't have had a problem. But it's literally the heart is coming from somewhere else.
Yeah. So then a follow-up and just a hypothetical, because when you were talking about source codes and, just wondering if it's technically even feasible or possible, because you own the Tejas because you own the source code, is it possible for you to decide to swap engines in the future if need be?
It's possible, of course. It is possible. It's going to take time. For instance, if you go with a Safran engine, you take one of the engines from the Rafale and you fit it over there. It is theoretically possible, but then, it's not even like heart transplants, right? Yeah. It's not that you cut out a heart and you put in another one. Aircraft are built around the engines. Yeah. And in this case, that was the problem with the LCA, was that because the Kaveri didn't deliver, you built the LCA around the G404 and then later the 414. But this is absolutely top priority. They should wargame this possibility. What you just outlined, it's a scary thing. But, in 2026, anything goes.
Anything goes, yeah.
So you have to wargame the possibility that what if there are American sanctions on all your combat aircraft, or well, fortunately no combat aircraft, but transport aircraft, helicopters, and what do you do then? How do you de-risk? What's your plan B going to be? All of these have to be done. So again, to quote my friend Admiral Srikhande, is that every scenario short of alien invasion needs to be wargamed and prepared for, at least in writing. You put those scenarios there, so at least these things you start thinking it through, and when you write it, you start thinking about these alternatives, and that the world that we developed our programs in was a very different world. Yes. It was a very idealistic world.
It was the world that Mr. Carney was referring to in the speech at Davos.
That's right. It's the world that where who's that famous American journalist who wrote that book, which I can never, The Flat Earth, where he said the world is flat and everybody's holding hands and singing Kumbaya and globalization. And this is the end of globalization. Yeah. You're looking at a very, very different world now.
What a scary thought to end this episode on, honestly. Like I said, I never imagined this question. Would you have to think of changing the engine of your LCA program? Because, like you said, because earlier, the program has to come through. You're depending on it. It's very, very crucial. And which I think also makes the side deal. I wouldn't call it the side deal, actually. That should be the prime deal.
Yeah,
that's the engine deal with future. France. That's the deal actually that's going to sustain you for the future. And that's a topic and that's an engine that we'll focus on very soon on a defense. I promise that to our listeners and viewers. Thanks, Sandeep, as always. Fantastic chat. Great.
Thanks for having me, Dev.
That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with our passport. Bye-bye.